I'm sure that many of you who have gone out to eat at an establishment, a restaurant, uh, some place to eat lunch, uh, maybe breakfast or even dinner, you have had servers wait for you. Some call them waiters and waitresses, but nonetheless, they are servers. They bring you beverage, coffee, uh, soda, water, maybe even alcohol right before your main meal comes or your entree. But one thing that we can probably all attest to is the fact that in most instances, when you have a server, it is common to give them a gratuity, uh, more commonly referred to as a tip. Now, I believe over the past maybe 5 years or so, the tips in this particular area have gone up to at least 15% of what your total cost for your meal is. And in some restaurants, the tip or the gratuity is included in your bill, as it were. But are tips ethical? Is it really practical to tip a waiter or a waitress? Now, before I go any further, let me say this also. There are other occupations where people receive tips where they are not necessarily workers in a restaurant establishment, servers or waiters and waitresses. There are habits that some of us have, consumers, where, for example, someone fixes our automobile, we might give them an extra 25 bucks. Or someone comes out to do some work on your plumbing or what have you, you might give them a bonus or what have you, as a form of saying thank you for doing the work. But you've already paid them for the work. Why are you giving them something in addition to that? So, getting back to the restaurant industry, did you not know that there's a similar behavior and or habit in Europe where, let's say, uh, something costs, I'm going to say American dollars because I'm not that familiar with how they use the pound system, but they round up their bill. For example, if they spend what is equivalent to $25.50 in um, American money in England, let's say, or in the UK, instead of giving the server or the waiter or waitress $25.50, they'll just round it up to $26. That's pretty much a habit that they have in Europe, many places in Europe anyway. So, somewhere 100 years or so ago is when they began that tipping habit, if you will, in Europe. So it came here to America, and people have been utilizing that custom ever since. So, what I'm getting at in this video is I don't believe that tipping is actually ethical. It's not right. Now, I had an experience many years ago at a restaurant here in Ohio where I worked third shift on a job that I had. And I typically would get something to eat before I went to work. So there was a restaurant, and I won't mention the name of the restaurant, but I went to the restaurant and I sat down uh, to get something to eat before I went to work. And there were a few waitresses standing behind the counter, and it was only a handful of people in the restaurant. And I sat there for about 15 minutes before anyone waited on my table. So a young lady came to my table and she said that, "Sir, I'm not your waitress, but I'll take your order." I said, "Okay." So she took my order, she brought it back. And after I completed my meal, I had thought about why did it take me so long to be waited on or served. But being the individual that I am, I don't like to disturb the water if I don't have to and cause scenes and things like that. So I did indeed give a tip that particular day, even with that, what I deemed to be not so good service. So I began to walk out the door after I paid my bill. So as I'm walking out of the door, the young lady that waited on my table came out the front door and stopped me. She said, "Excuse me, sir." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm sorry, but the reason that the other waitresses didn't wait on your table was because they said the last time that you were here, you did not tip. We only make $2.40 something cents an hour plus tips." So I kindly repeated what she said. "Excuse me, you make $2.40 something cents plus tips?" She said, "Yes, that's correct." I only repeated it just to make sure and to have a mental record that I did hear exactly what I thought I heard. So I was perturbed. I didn't go back in and speak with the manager because, as I said, I had to go back and get ready for work, which was just down the street from the restaurant. And so this young lady that had waited on my table was actually the head waitress. And the other young ladies were just regular waitresses. So what I did was I got home. Before I went to work, I made a phone call to the restaurant and I told the manager what had happened. And he told me that I should have addressed it when I was in there and he would have taken care of it. And he said, "Thank you for telling me that. I'll take care of it." And I said, "No, I'm not satisfied with what you just said." And I asked him what his name was. And I said, "I want the phone number to the main office." And he gave me the phone number. The very next day, I called the main office to that restaurant, which happens to be in the same city that I'm in. And I spoke to the head man in charge. I mean, the big kahuna. And I told him what happened. I explained it blow by blow. And he asked me who was the manager. I told him. And he asked me the name of the lady that waited on me. And I told him that as well. And he apologized to me on the phone. He said, "I am so sorry that you had to experience that." And subsequent to that, he sent me an official letter with the letterhead of the company on it and the location of the store and the store number and all of this other stuff, and apologized and actually sent me some free tickets to eat. Not to mention, I felt very uncomfortable going back, especially in a short period of time, because I was still a little perturbed at the service. Well, anyway, about a year later, maybe less, I was driving at another restaurant through the drive-through, a different restaurant, and the lady that waited on me looked familiar, and I looked a little bit harder. I said, "I know her from somewhere," and it hit me. That was the head waitress at the restaurant where I received the bad service at. She was working at a different restaurant. So I came to find out that the head boss over this restaurant had fired all of the not the cashiers, but all of the waitresses. He fired all of them. Now I don't know if the manager was still there, but he fired her, the one who was at this new restaurant that I saw. And I know she recognized me because she looked at me strange when I saw her. But anyway, he fired her and the other two waitresses as well. Can you say justice? I didn't expect that to happen, but I believe that it should have happened now that I look back in hindsight. So, going back to tipping being ethical, here's what I know. Even though it's custom or customary, even though you may be used to it and you've been doing it for a while, you that I may be talking about in this audience right now, I've grown accustomed to it over the years too, and I know we tipped because we get good service. Especially when you get extremely good service, you want to give a tip. But why are we tipping in the first place? Now, if you are working in an occupation or on a job where you're making less or 1/3 of minimum wage, Why are you even there in the first place? If you depend on tips, you shouldn't be there. So, what you're really saying in essence is that if you don't receive a substantial or an adequate amount of tips throughout a week or every 2 weeks, you could potentially be on the street because you don't have enough money to pay your monthly bills. Isn't that strange? Isn't that bizarre? Why don't the employer pay his employees at least minimum wage? You know why? They're cheap. They don't want to. They actually could pay minimum wage, but they don't want to. And so there's a contingency. If you provide a certain type of service, you have to sell yourself as a commodity. If you're a waiter or a waitress, you're going to receive a certain amount of money, potentially in tips. In addition to the 213 that they say is about the average in America across the board that these waiters and waitresses make. At your standard restaurant, I'm not talking about the high quality restaurants per se, that's another subject maybe, but most simple restaurants where you have servers, they make approximately $2.15 to $2.19 an hour plus tips. That's not my fault, and that's not my problem. It's not your fault, and it's not your problem either. So what they're really telling us, what the industry, the restaurant industry is really telling us, and what their restaurant is telling us, is that we are actually paying their salary. Have you ever thought about it like this? So if you are a young lady or a young man or middle-aged lady or man, and you're working in the restaurant industry as a waiter or waitress, and you're making $2.19, $2.50 an hour, and you need the tips to get by, to have a full paycheck, so to speak, so that you can take care of your financial obligations, so that you can live. Why don't you have a different job? Why do you place that stress on yourself? And why is it that you look down your nose when someone doesn't tip you, as if we, the consumer, the customer, owe it to you? I mean, listen, aren't you supposed to give good service or great service regardless of you receiving a tip? Isn't that just simply what you're supposed to do? So let me tell you this. If I went to a car wash, I expect my car to be washed thoroughly and vacuumed, if that's what comes along with the car wash. I expect that. If I go to get a haircut, I expect my hair to be cut as best as they can possibly cut it, and shape me up and what have you, because that's the nature of the job. You're supposed to do a great job. If I go to the grocery store and I'm patronizing that industry or that company, that store, I expect the cashier to treat me with respect and dignity, because that's what they're supposed to be doing. I also, when I go to a restaurant, expect you to come to my table in a timely manner and inquire as to what my needs are as a patron. Would I like a beverage? What's the entree? Do I need another minute or something? Because that's common courtesy and decency, and it's your job. I should not have to reward you monetarily in addition to your regular salary so that you can get paid by me. I am already paying for the meal, so the restaurant has received its just due. So if I'm paying for the meal that you have charged me for, why in the world am I paying the salary of the person who's waiting on me as well? Hello. That's supposed to come out of the restaurant's general funds. So whatever the restaurant makes, its gross revenue, is supposed to pay for everything associated with that restaurant, the overhead and the employee's salary. I'm not supposed to directly contribute anything additional to what the restaurant owner and or manager owes its employees. That's not my job. It's not my responsibility, nor is it yours. So we've been duped. We have been misled to believe that it is our job to give something additional to a waiter and a waitress just because tradition and custom says so. Wake up, America. Use your common sense. Use your ears and your eyes and see that you have been deceived. When you apply for a job, you are supposed to go and apply for a job that can supply enough income for you to sustain your life. Not a job where you're going to be on the edge, not knowing whether or not you're going to have enough tips to supply your needs. So if you have that type of job, you probably need to be looking for another job that pays at least minimum wage or more. Because if you take it out on the customer or the patron, as they did on me in my instance, or the example that I gave you from that true story, if you're going to take it out on me, the customer, me not paying your salary in addition to what you already have, then you deserve what you get when you lose that job. It's not my fault. It's no one's fault but yours for choosing that occupation. Now, it doesn't mean that if I were to go to a restaurant today that I wouldn't give a tip, because I have tipped for many years. But guess what? I don't feel obligated to do it because I have an understanding. It's not my job to pay you. It's your company's job to pay you. That's it. That's all. Now, are you going to continue to tip? That's my tip of the day. So long.